Today we're going to talk about comparing fractions, and there's 3 ways to do it. It's very important to know more than one way because oftentimes fractions might look very similar or one model might not be accurate, especially when you're drawing it. You always have human error, so I can't draw it perfectly. You can see when I tried to draw 2 squares the same size, one's a little bit bigger, so it might be hard to tell which is bigger or which is smaller, so it's important to go ahead and know all 3 ways to compare fractions. Today we're going to compare the fraction 3 out of 4 and 1 out of 2, or 3/4 and 1/2. Let's start with the visual model. The first fraction is 3/4, so I'm going to break my visual model into 4 parts. I want the parts to be equal, and I did 4 parts because I see 4 in the denominator. 3 out of 4 parts are going to be colored in. So I'm going to shade 3/4, 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. My next fraction is 1/2. So I'm going to break this one in half. And I'm going to shade in half. 1/2, and that would be 2/2. So when I'm looking at these 2 models, I can kind of tell which one I think might be a little bit bigger. I'm noticing that if I covered up this looks like half is colored in, and they look like the same if I cover this one up here. Looks like half and half. So this one looks like a little bit more than half. If they match, this one would have a little bit more colored in here. So I can see that this one is slightly bigger than this one. But if they were too close to tell, or you're not so sure, it's important to check multiple ways. So we'll also check here with a number line. The first number line I'm going to divide into 4 equal parts based on this denominator here. So I'll first break it in half and cut the half in half again to make fourths. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. And you notice that 4/4 is at the end of the line because 4/4 is a whole. My next line I'll be breaking into half, so I just need to make a halfway mark. From this line, I can see that 3/4 is right here, and 1/2 is right here. From the number lines, you can tell that 3/4 is closer to the whole than 1/2. This is 2/2 here, and these are zeros. 0, 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4, that's a whole. 0, 1/2, 2/2, that's a whole. I can see that the wholes line up because they're equivalent or equal. I can see that 2/4 lines up with 1/2 because they're equal. And I can also see that if these two line up, then this one must be bigger than 1/2. So I'm noticing from this number line and this visual model that 3/4 is greater than 1/2. I'll also model it using a fraction bar. I'm going to break the first fraction bar, or partition the first fraction bar, into 4 equal parts. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. The second fraction bar I'm going to just break in half. And I can shade in the fraction bars neatly. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4 is colored in. My next fraction bar is going to represent 1/2. 1/2. I can see that this fraction bar is greater or has more shaded in than unshaded. Only a tiny piece is left unshaded, where a larger piece here is left unshaded. So the shaded portion is greater. 3/4 is more than 1/2. Then I can write my symbol in here. 3/4 is greater than 1/2. Knowing these 3 ways to compare fractions is important. And sometimes fractions can look very close when we're trying to compare them, and that's why it's great to try more than one strategy and to practice more than one strategy so that we can check our work and compare them. So if I just did this, it would be important that I check my work by using a number line or a fraction bar model to prove it. We're going to try the same thing with another set of fractions. Let's go ahead this time and look at the fractions 1/4 and 2/8. The job is to compare these fractions. Which one is larger? Which one is smaller? So we're going to start by comparing them with a number line. The important thing to do when you're comparing two fractions is make sure that your number lines are exactly or very close to exactly the same size. So I'm going to draw them right underneath each other so I can try to line them up and make sure that they look the same size. If one number line is bigger or the number lines are not the same size, then I cannot compare these fractions. It's important that we use the same size model to help us. So now we're going to go ahead and partition the first line into 4 equal parts. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. That's a whole. So we can go ahead and label that 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. We can put 0 on the number line there. Now the next line, I see 8 in the denominator. So I need to partition the line into 8 parts. 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, 8/8. I actually only drew 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 lines, but there's 8 equal spaces. 1 space, 2 space, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So 8 equal spaces. 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, 8/8. That's a whole. Now when I'm comparing, I want to go ahead and put a star at 1/4. And I'm going to look at the line carefully and put a star at 2/8. It's hard for me to tell which one is bigger. They actually almost look the same. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to try doing a fraction bar. I'm going to prove it in a different way just to make sure and to check my work. So I'm going to use the strategy of fraction bars here. The important thing is that you draw each fraction bar the exact same size, or try to get close. I draw them right underneath each other so I can see that they look almost the same. Now I'm going to break the first one into 4 equal parts. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4. 4/4 is the end of the line, which is the whole. I can shade in 1/4. Now, for the next one, I need to break it into 8 equal parts. 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, 8/8. That's a whole. I need to shade in 2 out of 8 parts. So I'm going to color in 2 out of 8 parts. This fraction bar shows 1/4. This fraction bar shows 2/8. If I notice, they look very similar. They could be equal or equivalent. Let's go ahead and use our last form, which is a visual model. I recommend using a square shape for this one, and the most important thing is drawing the square shapes close together so I can compare them, and also trying to draw them the same size. We don't want one to be bigger than the other because it will be too hard to compare. I also kind of want to cut them in similar ways so that I can compare them. So the first one's cut into fourths because of this 4 in the denominator. I'm going to shade 1/4. 1 out of 4 parts is colored. And the next one I'm going to draw 8 parts because there's an 8 in the denominator. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There's 8 parts. And I'm going to shade it in the same area because I want to compare it. So if I start shading down here, it might be hard to look at it, but I'm going to try and shade it in the same area. 2/8. I can see that 2/8 looks exactly like 1/4. On the number line, 2/8 and 1/4 lined up, and it shows me that they are equivalent or equal. And same here with the fraction bar, I can see that they lined up. So I can safely say, after trying all 3 strategies, that 1/4 is actually equal to 2/8, and not one is bigger than the other. Today, we compared fractions using 3 strategies: the number line strategy, the visual model strategy, and the fraction bar strategy. It's your turn. Try comparing 2 fractions using all 3 strategies to prove your answer. Maybe you would like to try these fractions. Let's try 1/8 and 1/4. Can you compare 1/8 and 1/4 using all 3 strategies? Go ahead and give it a shot using your notebook paper.